Hi there. Welcome, everybody, to the BFI presentation about employment analytics and intervention. My name is Jeff Wellstead, and my work spans about three different missions across the last 2 decades. The first of which is elevating HR leaders into strategic, insight-driven partners through AI coaching and capability building. My second focus is guiding HR tech companies to design and scale ethical, people-centered AI solutions in their capabilities. And third is championing skills-based organizations, as I think the fluid kind of skills-first model is going to have a lot more relevance in the very near future than rigid job structures. In this session, we're going to explore how AI-driven tools like large language models, or LLMs, as you'll hear me refer to them, can enhance our approach to employee engagement surveys, moving us from being much more reactive on an annual basis and just taking snapshots of what's happening to actually becoming much more real time and creating much more actionable insights that are here with us today. We're going to dive into the power of thematic clustering, sentiment analysis, and targeted segmentation, all working together to basically help us spot early warning signs and proactively address engagement gaps. And by the end of the session, you should be able to identify some pretty interesting AI tools that track engagement, how to use large language models to extract insight from survey data, and segment results to target specific interventions. This builds on our existing experience with engagement surveys and exit interviews and retention strategies. And in this case, we're only using AI as an augmentation to expand our pattern matching capabilities already. And to very quickly move from data gathering to recommended actions in a fraction of the time that it would normally take you otherwise. The key is really combining vendor tools and large language model interactions to move from, this annual kind of once a year kind of view and a very rear view, process to much more kind of like forward leaning and real time based, kind of information gathering and basically working with artificial intelligence to help us think through all of the different combinations of activities, of environmental issues and conditions, and of the individuals and their feedback themselves to really start to make sense in a holistic fashion around all of this material. So we're going to get into some core skills today. And those things I mentioned earlier sounded really fancy and scientific, but in fact, they're really quite easy to understand. The core skills we're going to cover today are sentiment analysis using AI, thematic clustering, which is simply clustering things into themes and trying to kind of find out what patterns are existing in that space. And then segmentation by group for much more specific and targeted actions going forward, using our own human judgment to recognize the significance of the patterns that the AI will identify for us. Sentiment analysis, you've probably heard that quite a bit, allows us to kind of quickly identify positive and negative sentiment in the employee feedback at scale. And basically can help us see, where that's coming from, and then we can start to posit why it's coming from certain populations. Thematic clustering just groups the feedback into key themes, so we can spot patterns and trends that might be missed in a manual review. I don't know how many of you basically have pored over the results from your annual or semi-annual or quarterly, kind of employee engagement surveys. There's a lot to know. And the vendors are getting better at helping us understand that. But importantly, what we know about our organizations, vendors will never know. So it's important basically for us to have an alternative means to go out and engage with LLMs and see if in fact they can give us some additional insight. By combining our human expertise with AI analysis, we can really uncover some very meaningful insights and that drive impactful change. And this is the big issue because so often we go and run these surveys. We pore over the data for the next month or two. We then kind of disseminate this information to our executive teams, our leadership teams, our management teams, and eventually to employees. And that whole process can take a couple of months. And at the end of the day, what people always ever wanted to know is, what are you going to do about it? This is the information we're sharing with you. What actions are we going to take? Well, the good news is when you basically engage with tools like LLMs, you really can get to much more targeted action at a very, very quick clip. So I'm going to take you on a quick journey in terms of how, in this particular case, ChatGPT-5 tackles the challenge of interrogating employee engagement survey results and helps us make sense of them, right? Going as high level or as narrowly focused as we need to in order to get to action and impact. The key steps are always in these cases, four things. You want to export the survey data from your employee engagement tool, number one. You want to importantly anonymize that data to protect any respondent privacy. You may also need to seek consent from everybody to make sure that it's okay to use their data. But again, you're going to anonymize it. You're going to change out the names. You're going to change out any kind of identifiable personal information and basically create your own encryption pattern. When you use an LLM like GPT-5 to perform a thematic analysis on anonymized data, we're basically going to make sure that we keep certain demographic elements in there that are going to be helpful for us to kind of drill down and kind of understand what particular groups are having what particular experiences. And then, of course, we're going to continuously iterate on the analysis by segmenting the data in different ways and also kind of querying the LLM to say, can you help me think of it this way? Can you challenge me on this? And what would we do about this? So you'll see some of that. We're going to go live in a minute and kind of like show you on GPT. Anonymization is really, though, critical, right, to protecting employee privacy. So again, replacing any personally identifiable information is absolutely essential. I can't hammer that home enough. So with the synthetic, we have to create some synthetic data because I don't really have anybody's live data, to hand. And frankly, that's perfectly fine. So I'm going to show you how it is I instructed ChatGPT to go and invent a company full of employees and basically have those employees, share their ratings or aggregate their ratings across 10 different critical questions. And then also have an employee net promoter score indicator, again, on a 1 to 5 basis. And then finally, I think I asked for an open text response as to whether or not you would recommend working at this company to a friend. And with that, we were able to kind of get into some really interesting things. So what I would like to do now, if I could, is just pop over to our dear friend, ChatGPT. Don't worry, I'm not anthropomorphizing anything quite yet. I just wanted to show you the kind of makeup of the initial prompt that I created. And this one is kind of interesting. So these prompts typically have 4 aspects to them. They typically require you to kind of give GPT a particular role. The reason why you do that is because it helps GPT or any large language model really narrowly focus on a particular aspect of expertise and experience. And it doesn't then scrape the entire internet and waste a whole bunch of time, effort, money, and energy to go do so. The second thing you want to do is provide context. And this, I can't stress enough, this is super, super important. You have to give the machine a sense for what is it you're trying to accomplish. Don't hold anything back. This isn't sort of a guessing game. This is really kind of more, let me just spill the beans and kind of tell you what it is I'm trying to accomplish. And then if in so doing, you maybe can extrapolate data and information I might need that I might not have even thought to ask for. And that happens all the time when I'm building prompts for in this particular case, ChatGPT. It always ever comes back with 5, 10-fold more information than I ever asked for originally, which I think is super clever. So in this particular case, and sorry, the other 2 elements are basically to then kind of, once you've given it a role and once you've given it context, you want to kind of give it a task and say, this is what I need your help in doing. And again, the more explicit, the more specific you can possibly be, the better off you're going to be, right? In terms of getting a response that's really rich and really powerful. and you'll have fewer iterations then to chase. And then sort of the last element, if you're writing something externally or whatever the case, you can actually kind of assign a particular tone of voice, or a particular way that you want the information sent to you. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. These tools have big brains, right? And we're trained on just, trillions of data points. And so when you ask it for analysis, it will go deep, it will go long, and it will confuse you to no end in very short order, unless you are, in fact, sort of a PhD level individual. And that's perfectly fine. It's really good to have those data points. I don't begrudge that at all. What I would actually like, though, is I would like graphs that would speak to a broader audience, right? Frankly, me included, that would be quite simple and quite straightforward in terms of that. So that's kind of what we asked. So I put all that together in a prompt. It probably literally took me, I don't know, a couple of minutes to type in. It took me a little bit longer to think it through. And ChatGPT 5, which is a combination of all of the OpenAI models into one. So it has the very rapid, fast mini models. It has the medium models, and then it has the reasoning models in there. And the reason why I am just going to scroll through some of these elements in terms of how it is GPT responded to me is that in a number of cases, it used its reasoning model, its thinking model. If you see this option here, you can see there are a number of different options, and thinking takes longest. And so I didn't want to, frankly, waste our time together waiting for GPT to kind of come back. But it really is amazing how quickly this ultimately did happen. Right. So I set it off. I said, create a synthetic database, and it did. And if I just basically expand this and show you what it is, you basically can see that there are 10 employee engagement questions up top. Then there was the 11th being the employee net promoter score. And then would you recommend to a friend? And GPT did the whole thing, just made up the whole thing for me, which is great, right? And said, I've done all this, and I've told you what I've done. And it's important to have this, by the way, as an audit record and as a documentation, if you will, of the exercise you've undertaken. I then said, great, here is my prompt in terms of interrogating this database. And I said, carefully examine the employee survey results and create a multidimensional difference in perspectives, comparing the employees' points of view and those of management and leadership. Okay? Because I have an intuition as an HR person that this is an issue, that this is a problem. I've heard it enough from enough people. And I know I want to kind of like go and test my hypothesis based on the data and see where it comes out. So it came back with all manner of statistical reporting. I couldn't quite make heads or tails of it. It looked not good in a number of cases, but I wasn't quite sure. And so I kind of went through it all, and believe it or not, ultimately ended up on this particular graphic, which kind of indicated that everybody was more or less in the same boat from an engagement perspective. I know that not to be true. Okay. So I went back and I did explain to ChatGPT, and I'll just kind of cruise down here. I said, hey, thanks for this. Hold on a second. If I can just find, let me just find, because I asked it a whole bunch of other questions in relation to this, in relation to this presentation, which was super interesting. By the way, I had it write a script and do all sorts of fascinating things. It was very cool. Right. I took a look at the data and I was like, you know what? This is not going to help anybody. It's not going to wow anybody. It's not going to kind of show the kind of critical differences. So I said, can you do me a favor and go back and review the responses that you created for the synthetic database? And can you create more differentiation, right, between the engagement responses? That would be a much more compelling and realistic outcome in your analysis. And I always ever say thank you. You never know. And it basically went to town. It recreated the same table, okay? It showed, again, a lot of the same statistical outputs, which again, I'm going to save just in case anybody challenges me on this stuff. If I'm in front of the executive team and I've got a couple of quant analysts in the room who are skeptical, and they're like, where did you get this information from? And I'll say, I got it directly from the horse's mouth, being the employees. And here's the statistical and relevant reporting that we did on it. So it's going to give me all this, but and again, it's not singing to me. It's not talking to me. And then give me this differential, which is great. That makes a lot more sense. Employees really kind of dissatisfied in this particular case quite badly. Okay. Leaders, of course, feeling quite fine about everything, and management kind of being somewhere in between. That's almost always the case with these employment surveys. Engagement surveys. It then kind of goes and explains to me, well, here's what's different about the differentiated cut. I've changed the data, and so here's how that's affected things. Again, great for documentation. Hold on to it. Super useful. It then kind of talks about where perspectives diverge. And if this was real data, this is a kind of thing you'd want to know. The subtleties, the nuances. Why is it people are kind of going in different directions on things? Talks about the evidence on the screen. It talks about the reporting. And here's the cool part about working with anything with ChatGPT. If you don't understand something, do not freak out. In fact, go back to your ChatGPT and say, I don't understand the statistics that you sent me back and the reporting that you sent me back. Can you talk to me as if I were 16 years old and I hadn't taken any college courses in this, and show me visually how this would work? You'd be shocked. And I kind of did that, right? I kind of basically said, listen, can you create for me some simpler graphs like bar charts and pie charts to better help me understand the difference between these three employee buckets? And I was like, yep, no problem. It even actually created links that I could go to if I wanted to, but it also prints them out here. Okay, we have the bar chart that we know exists. We then have a really useful chart that just kind of groups employees, managers, and leaders under each particular area that we were interrogating for employee engagement. And that in and of itself tells us a story, but it keeps going. Net promoter score, wow, starts at 0 for employees and goes down to -60. That's not good because, frankly, leadership and management, who are probably rated more positively, aren't even showing up in this file. This pie chart looks painful. 68% of the employee population negative, 20% neutral. I kind of group those together because, quite frankly, if you're not generally positive about your work environment, you're probably more negative than not. Okay. So that's not good, but you can see that management's actually 55% positive, 45% neutral. Okay. Don't know if they're seeing the world, and certainly, the folks in leadership world are not seeing this at all. So you can imagine what it's going to be like to present this data to the executive team. It's going to be a bit confusing, to them, and they're going to be like, well, I don't understand. I don't see your point. Okay. So I said, in this particular case, I kind of took it a step further and said, look, thanks for this information. Can you do me a favor and create a simple list of at least 5 different solutions to improving the employee experience, such that we might increase the level of engagement for individual contributors? Absolutely, it says. And off it goes very quickly in a matter of seconds. The things that keep showing up are career growth and development pathways. Here's what to do. Here's why it works. Recognition and feedback loops. Again, that popped up on a regular basis. Higher frequency. AI figured that out in no time flat. And is basically saying, I've done the math. Trust me when I tell you this will work. Workload and resource balancing. Okay. Obviously, this is almost always ever a problem in any company I've ever worked with, for sure. Manager enablement on communication. Again, super important. How often does it happen that managers are not communicating regularly or frequently enough or clearly enough? That is oftentimes the situation, and it's not always their fault. So it's important that we kind of create a very, very, kind of useful and clarifying, process to make sure that everybody's in the loop. And then finally, we need to increase employee voice and involvement. Okay. And it gives us some ideas and thoughts around this. So this is all super good, very, very helpful. Let's say, though, that I really struggle to kind of figure out what is going to be the best way in which we're going to get leadership and management and individual contributors on the same page. So I'm going to say something like this: because of the incredibly stark difference between the opinions of leaders regarding engagement versus the opinions of individual contributors, how would I best go about communicating this to my exec team in such a way that they will understand the individual contributors' opinions and see beyond their own. Okay, natural language processing, just kind of put it up there and just say, let's see what we can do to kind of ferret this out. Let's see how quickly ChatGPT 5 comes up with an idea. Oh, I had a brilliant question. How about that? Right, brilliant question. One of the most important challenges in engagement work. Leaders often live in a different reality. They feel aligned to the mission, supported and resourced, while individual contributors are battling day-to-day frustrations. Bridging that perception gap requires framing, evidence, and empathy. Here are ways you can go about structuring your communication to your exec team. And then it proceeds then to kind of give me 5 solutions in terms of this. And says, lead with data as an example, right? And show visual stuff so they kind of get it in one, right? Add a sentiment snapshot. No, workload is overwhelming during these sprints. Leadership comments, absolutely. Transparent leadership is strong mission alignment, that kind of a thing. Just kind of really make sure that they understand that this is the voice of the people. Connect the gaps to business risk, use empathy to flip the lens, and position solutions as strategic, not just HR fixes. This is not an HR problem. HR, in this case, is the messenger and the translator and the data driver. Okay. So, and it always ever ends, every one of these prompts always ever ends with a brilliant kind of like suggestion in terms of, hey, what else can I do to help you here? And it's great because it gets my wheels, turning, and it gets me thinking creatively about how is it I go about solving for this. You see, just like you in these situations, we kind of know what the reality is. We know that there's some toxicity in the leadership team. We know that our managers are poorly trained. We know that our individual contributors are possibly overworked, oversubscribed, and possibly even under-resourced, okay? And that's stuff we have to fix. But we don't fix that by coming straight out saying, pay people more, be nice to them, hire more of them, don't overstress them. You can't just come out with like those sorts of things because you get laughed out of the room, right? Especially by the CFO. So this is what ChatGPT 5 can help you do, and it's super helpful from that perspective. Let's go back to the presentation. Kind of see where we've landed here. So protecting data, we talked about that. We also kind of talked, well, we should mention that we want to look at pitfalls and fixes. And this is always ever a challenge. The privacy risk is huge, right? So you, again, want to make sure that you go through a strict anonymization process. If you question whether or not your data is properly anonymized, engage with a colleague in your AI kind of venture team. Hopefully you've got one of those together. Certainly kind of review your AI documentation, policy usage documentation. Hopefully you have a policy in place. If you do not, you need to get one. And frankly, it's brilliant when HR leads on this because they can kind of connect all the right players in compliance and legal and IT and operations and just make sure that you've got a good policy in place. And make sure that you're not misreading the tone, right? Cross-check the sentiment analysis. Don't take large language models at their word, okay? They may be missing some points too. So it's important basically that you kind of frame that up. Okay, why does engagement matter? Okay, you're possibly struggling with some of this too. You basically run this engagement report, you get the data back, and the managers and the leaders are always ever a bit skeptical about the whole thing. And they're like, you know what? This just gives the employees a chance to bitch and moan about work here, and it's difficult and it's hard and everything else. You get that a lot. And even if they don't say it, they're probably thinking it. But this is not just a buzzword. This is money. This is big money. And if you are an HR team that basically looks at employee engagement as if it's a gold mine of data to be analyzed and to be looked at, you're going to be loads better off. Treat this like a science experiment. Okay. Pretend like you actually don't know any of these people personally and basically, kind of like just troll the data and make all sorts of sense of it. Cut it and slice it in a whole bunch of different ways until it starts to sing to you. It starts to speak to you because engagement is about retention. It's about performance. It's about productivity. Okay. Each one of those elements has a cost and a monetary element associated with it, and they are not small. Retention, especially, or attrition, right? So when you think about it, apparently, according to the CIPD, they basically estimate that if you lose good, strong performers, it is as if you have then dropped 1.5 times their salary in order basically to lose that individual and then have to recruit that individual back to train that individual. You've lost productivity. You've lost morale on the desk. You possibly inspired other people to start picking up the phone to recruiters. People who are strong performers leaving an organization are a very powerful signal to everybody else in the organization, except typically your least performing employees who are holding on for dear life. Okay. So it's important that when you gather this data and you work through all the details, spend some time with finance and start to uncover what the financial impact of these things is going to be. So now let's explore some AI tools that can help you spot these interesting shifts in terms of people's morale and kind of make sure that you don't miss the micro dips, those things that basically are building toward folks making a very difficult decision to leave the organization. Okay. Now, these tools that I'm going to show you have their own unique strengths, and I am not advocating for any one of them because it really depends on your company. It depends on the makeup. It depends on your leadership. It depends on how your culture basically treats this kind of information. So each one of these has its own unique purpose and power. Okay, so let's dive into a number of tools here. These platforms, excuse me, bring together AI-driven insights and real-time feedback and predictive analytics. And they provide like an interesting kind of deeper understanding of employee sentiment, which is super useful. But with so many options available, and there are so many out there, who do you choose or how do you choose the right one for your organization? So let's just take a look at some of the top players. And these are some of the most popular tools that are out there. And each one of these offers unique capabilities. Excuse me, and understanding their differences is really, really key to choosing the best solution for the company. So we'll start with Culture Amp. It's a tool I've implemented probably 7 times during my career, and I find it particularly useful, super easy, really good at pulse surveys, albeit it does, larger surveys equally as well. They are known first and foremost for their employee insight tools, but have also kind of like gone into things like goals and gone into things like development planning and career mapping and all sorts of interesting things, all related to how people are feeling and how people are performing. It's got lots of interesting, that's the other thing too that's useful about it. They basically query on a regular basis their entire 7,000 strong customer base and are always ever looking for programs that specifically address issues that arise in employee engagement surveys. So it's really quite helpful to kind of have that at your fingertips as you're kind of discovering issues and problems. Instead of going to an LLM, albeit that's also a very, very cool idea. It's always ever good to kind of validate and cross-check. Culture Amp kind of provides a list of tools that might be, or programs that might be useful in remediating some of the concerns and risk that you're having. So next up is Glint, and what sets Glint apart is the focus on real-time feedback, offering not just sort of engagement data, but also the ability to analyze open text responses for sentiment. And we couldn't do that extraordinarily well, really, before the large language model started taking hold. And just using, kind of natural language processing, Glint kind of digs deeper into the emotional tone of the feedback and allows you to kind of see how the employees are really feeling about various aspects of their work environment. So it goes a lot deeper in that regard. This is really useful, by the way, when you're trying to kind of understand sort of emotional undercurrents that your company's people might be facing. Then there's Qualtrics, which links, and this is kind of interesting. It links employee engagement scores directly to operational data, okay, such as performance metrics or turnover rates. So these tools offer kind of like predictive churn alerts, and offer and kind of allow you basically to kind of understand how top talent basically is engaging, or how any of your talent members are kind of engaging, and basically looking for early signs that potentially they might be on the outs. And it combines engagement data with predictive analytics, and it gives you the power to kind of anticipate and prevent engagement declines, which is quite powerful. Workday Peakon. So Peakon was acquired by Workday back in 2021, and they offer another solution for continuous listening, capturing feedback not just from surveys, but actually from multiple touch points across the employee lifecycle. It's AI driven, and it analyzes engagement data in real time, and it helps leaders kind of understand not just what's happening now, but also how trends and patterns are evolving over the course of time. And now moving on to Perceptyx, which is also a terrific tool, right? Which focuses on holistic listening. It captures feedback from a variety of different touch points, from pulse surveys to exit interviews, right? It's got a very comprehensive approach and offers, predictable insights into employee behaviors, which means you can identify potential engagement issues early and take action to improve retention and morale, which is quite useful. It's especially valuable for organizations that want sort of like a 360-degree review of things. And then finally, Microsoft Viva, which I'm sure you probably have heard about if you're a Microsoft house. They typically integrate seamlessly into Microsoft 365. And this tool basically is all about fostering a connected, productive workforce by offering modules that address engagement, learning, well-being, and knowledge management. And it connects employee experience with productivity insights, which is quite useful, and allowing you to kind of track engagement and well-being while aligning with these business outcomes. So to sum it up, each one of these platforms, again, has unique strengths and capabilities, right? Whether it's real-time feedback or sentiment analysis or predictive insights or integration with existing tools. By understanding the differences between these, you can kind of start to choose and see how it is your organization, its culture, its leadership, and so forth will align, with what these tools actually can do for us. Again, just want to kind of just talk about this whole issue of safe setup, because I know this is big for a lot of HR folks. Not for nothing, but a big part of our jobs has always ever been risk mitigation, right? Compliance, making sure that we stay out of court, if at all possible, hopefully by behaving well, and never putting ourselves in a situation like that. Okay. But the goal of this particular slide is just simply to outline the key steps for safely setting up survey data before uploading it to a large language model. And there are some large language models that do claim that if you work with them, I think ChatGPT or OpenAI has a version called Teams, which is like £5 more a month than the 20 quid it normally costs for their paid for version. And they claim that they don't use your data in their training data. So they don't pull information from, private sector, if you will, and give it to. I mean, you basically can also purchase an API key, which basically kind of locks down, your information. But if you're worried still beyond all of that, and understandably so, always ever make sure to go through an anonymization process and remove, again, personal identification information like names, like emails, like team codes, as an example. This protects the anonymity, basically, of all the survey respondents. And finally, always ever make sure that you assign kind of neutral responding codes that maintain the context of what it is you're trying to look for, because you don't want to basically anonymize this so much that, frankly, the data is useless, and the LLM can't even make sense of it. So Just make sure you always ever follow these steps to ensure that you are keeping your data safe. As always, with our BFI courses, we always ever suggest a 7-day action plan post the training to focus on utilizing what it was you've just learned. If you're uncomfortable using your own data and you're just not comfortable setting that up, you can always ever ask the large language model like ChatGPT-5 to create for you a synthetic database, but you have to kind of tell it all the information you want in it. You begin with the end in mind. What kind of data are you going to be interrogating? What is it you're trying to find out? Okay, if those things are true, then those things have to be in the database, right? And I also am looking for particular patterns emerging, okay, just as an experiment. So I want to make sure I also inform in the initial prompt to ChatGPT, this is what I kind of want to see in terms of the data patterns, kind of like what I did when I showed you earlier, how that all worked. I wanted to see a differentiation between the employees, the managers, and the leaders. And so I just simply told it, make a differentiated, kind of pass through, and it did. What you want to do is, kind of like anonymize the survey, of course, and then you want to compare the themes and insights that are surfaced with the LLM in your manual analysis, working through it. And make sure that you ask it a bunch of questions. Really kind of interrogate the LLM. Why is it you think this is true? What evidence backs this up? How is it you're seeing this? Just kick the tires on it a bit, and you'll be surprised at how compliant, how useful, how insightful it is. It doesn't get angry with you, at least not on the surface. It, in fact, wants to work with you. It wants to make sure that you're getting the information you want. So it's very customer oriented from that perspective. So definitely play with it. Don't lose what it is you've learned here, and kind of like have a go and see what you actually can do to increase your experience with the whole thing. So just in reviewing the key takeaways from the presentation, we basically always ever want as real-time insight as we possibly can get. And so when you take a look at tools and so forth, make sure that it is capturing good data that you can then take action on very, very quickly. The whole focus of this thing is to retain great talent. The idea is you have a star team, or at least you hope you do. If you have a star team, you want to keep that star team happy and engaged and productive and working with each other and ideating and innovating. So that's really kind of what you're trying to do here, is create retention insurance, right? Not just because it's expensive, but that's a massive issue. It's because basically that will give you the best possible chance to dominate your particular market. And with all things, you want to be very data informed. Okay. You don't want to go on a hunch. That's what people always ever blamed HR for doing. You people are like, you're like witches and warlocks. You watch and you see patterns emerge, and then you come up with these interesting hypotheses. And weirdly, a lot of them actually come true. How do you do that? Well, that's not really a sustainable, certainly not a scalable answer. So what you want to make sure you do is to be backed by data and use the LLM as sort of your foil, your tool, to really double check and triple check, the data you're seeing, and make sure that you're seeing it in the same way it is seeing it. And that just helps you validate things. So that's really kind of it for this particular teaser. Thank you very much for participating with us today. If you wouldn't mind, just click down here, and we'd love you to share your thoughts about this session. We would also love to know how we might improve it. And otherwise, it's just up to me to thank you for listening to us, and we hope to hear and see you soon.